Chapter 3 of Into the Darkness! Woohoo! I didn't actually think I would end up making this, but here I am. Not sure if I'm going to continue this series, as it is a lot of time and effort to make each and every one of these videos. Once I do set up my whole PC and possibly get a new editing software, I might end up continuing with it, but for now, this will probably be the last chapter that I upload for a bit. That being said, this is from back to Cayden's point of view as the chapters go back and forth. And yeah, that's about it. Enjoy Chapter 3 of Into the Darkness, The Run. Keep following the girl and tell her to hurry up, I growled from the back of the group, instinctively checking behind me, knowing at any moment the monster would appear. I cursed as the situation was now out of my control, having to put my faith in an insane woman I just met. At least in the room I knew what I had to work with and what I had to do. Right now, I was just running for my life and could fall into a trap at any moment. The mere thought of seeing Evelyn or someone else die just because we took a wrong turn was nearly too much to handle. Just like in the room, however, I tried to calm my breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Despite being in what seemed like an abandoned asylum, the identical broken windows and locked metal doors flying by me almost felt melodic. Observing my surroundings and focusing on my breathing helped calm my nervous mind until I was rudely interrupted by the sudden roar behind me, followed by a metallic scraping sound. Oh shit, I heard someone yell in front of me, and part of me wanted to shout back, "You think you're scared? What about being the one at the end of the line?" But instead I kept my mouth shut and just put my head down. We seemed to be running in circles. My mind saw no difference from one hallway to the next. Every detail was nearly identical, and I prayed that this girl hadn't completely lost her marbles. The feeling of running with no end hit me with a hard sense of deja vu, and for a moment I was given a glimpse of my past. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment to try and capture whatever memory was coming to mind. Hopefully, it would distract me from my current predicament. When I opened my eyes, I saw that I wasn't in the asylum anymore. The smell of burnt casserole and cigarettes filled my nostrils. I knew that I was in my house, but it wasn't me. It was almost like I was a ghost watching myself from behind, like a reality TV show. A feeling of dread sat in the air like the fog in Silent Hill, almost powerful enough to give me a panic attack. Before I even had time to react, the sound of thundering footsteps came down the hallway. I knew who it was before I even saw them. The way the feet walked calmly, without any concern for time in the world. I just knew. I saw that the other me's hands were trembling, and as much as my other self tried to calm down by clenching them into fists, I could tell how easily I was quaking in fear. What the hell was wrong with me? I thought to myself, my eyes glued to the hallway, each second that passed feeling like an eternity. Finally, the shadow of a tall man could be seen. He was built like a football player, and even though the shadows reflect a larger image than the actual person, I could tell that he was at least 6'3". It wasn't until he fully rounded the corner when I saw the true beast of the man before me. The man that stood looming over my tiny figure in proportion held what seemed to be a worn leather belt. His eyes showed pure hatred, and whatever I did to offend this man, I knew it was something severe. Before other me could even open his mouth, the older man spoke, keeping his lips in a tight frown. "Take off your shirt. You know what to do," was all he said. I was stunned. I watched my other self just sit there, head down, refusing to move. So many emotions were swirling in my mind as he stood impatiently, and after a few seconds, the older man snarled, "Don't make me wait, boy." That was all my poor self needed to be snapped out of his daze. I watched as he slowly stood up and held his hands up as if to surrender. "Please, I didn't mean to, but I can't take any more of this. Please," he said weakly. The older man just shook his head and stepped forward. Without a second of hesitation, he brought down the end of the belt right onto the side of my other self's face. The sight of the leather breaking my skin was a horrific sight to watch. I could only stand there and gaze on helplessly as my other self's hands flew up to try and stop the next blow. Unfortunately for me, the older man decided not to use the belt, but rather knee my other self hard in the unprotected stomach region. I saw as my other self's lungs collapsed as he gasped for air, blood starting to block his vision from being whipped. This was all too much to take in, and I began to feel tears well up in my eyes. I wanted to move. I needed to, though I couldn't do a damn thing but just stay in place and watch my other self get beaten to a pulp. The assault continued, and I knew who this man was before I even saw him, but I just refused to believe it. My own father, my own flesh and blood. The man was supposed to be my savior and my protector, but here he was, causing me all this pain and suffering. Between wheezes, I heard myself muster out a small, "Why?" The man paused for a moment, obviously stunned by my question. "You know why," he said. "Tell me again." The other me fired back through gritted teeth, spitting out blood. The older man gave myself a look of pure rage, his ears turning red as he brought the belt down again on my bloodied face. "You're a fucking disgrace," he spat, turning his back to me before muttering under his breath as he walked down the hallway. "I wish that whore of a wife never even had you." The last words echoed in my mind long after he was gone. I watched as my bloodied other half sat there on the floor for a long time. After a while, he regained his composure and picked himself up, clenching his hands into fists before punching the wall hard. A single tear rolled down the side of his cheek, but he quickly wiped it off, grabbing the phone out of his back pocket and sending a quick text. Despite my loss of memories, I knew that I was going to run away, or at least try to. Something in my gut told me eventually I would end up back at this house, in this very same spot, with identical cuts and bruises. The combination of watching my own father beat me viciously and call me a disgrace made me wonder if it was truly going back to this hellhole. Almost. A few minutes passed and a quiet knock could be heard on the front door. I watched as other me seemed to visibly relax, doing his best to wipe the blood off of his face. The door opened before I could even get to it, and when I saw who stood in the doorway, my jaw dropped. It was Evelyn, but she was different. I couldn't tell whether it was the lighting or the fact that all the dirt was gone off of her face, but she was drop dead gorgeous. Her silky brown hair flowed down past her shoulders, her bright brown eyes piercing into other me's soul with a look of pure concern as she rushed over to me and pulled my other half into her arms. It was such a touching gesture that it made my heart ache. I wondered for a second if the Evelyn I knew would do that for me as well. I felt like I was almost intruding as I watched my other self cry into the arms of a girl I thought I barely knew. She just stood there, comforting him as I saw a different version of myself break down. I asked myself if Evelyn remembered all of this when she recognized me back in the room, and I couldn't help but feel ashamed for not remembering a single detail about her. I was snapped out of my gaze when I heard myself speak. "I'm going to do it this time," he said softly, now standing up, having regained his full composure. The look Evelyn gave him was that of pure pain, and I could tell that we've had this conversation before. After a long pause, Evelyn finally spoke. "And what next?" I don't know. I'll disappear. I'll go anywhere away from this place." He clenched his fist. Evelyn gently took his hands, and I watched as tears began to streak down her cheeks. "You and I both know that you can't. You have 3 more months, Cayden. Please," she whispered. My other self refused to look at her. He knew in his heart that he wasn't going to do it, but he also knew that he couldn't take any more of it. He was truly at an impasse, like a rope being pulled from both sides. I saw how the abuse was tearing me apart, bit by bit. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "Let's go to my place," Evelyn offered, leading him to the door. "We'll think of something that—" "No!" he interrupted, refusing to move. "We always do this. I say that I'm going to end it, and you convince me out of it, saying that we'll make a plan, but we never do. I can't keep running, Evelyn. I'm not a fucking racehorse, and I need to do something new, or I will go insane," he said, completely defeated. The awkwardness in the air was nearly palpable, as the two tried hard not to look at each other, but also needing each other's company more than ever. "Hey, Evelyn," other me finally said. "Yeah? Do you know the definition of insanity?" Evelyn swallowed, not wanting to give an answer, but also knowing how important this was for other me to get off his chest. "It's when you do the same thing over and over and over again, and you expect something different to happen, but nothing ever does, and you're stuck in the same goddamn loop over again, and you slowly die out." The other me started to break down, the tears welling up in his eyes again, as Evelyn watched on, heartbroken, seeing the boy in front of her weep openly. Out of habit, Evelyn began to chew on her thumbnail, running through different ideas in her head. After a moment, she came up with a conclusion, and without looking up, said softly, "Cayden, come stay at my place. I'll convince them." I don't remember much of anything, but something inside of me said that Evelyn offering to stay at her house was a very big deal, and most likely something that she hasn't offered before. Confirming my suspicions, my other half's eyes grew wide. "You can't do that, Evelyn. They would never let you. Besides, they don't even know about us. They don't know about me. What would they think about you going against your That agreement doesn't mean shit if you die before you even turn 18, she snapped. The atmosphere in the air died, and I kept looking down the hallway to see if my father would approach the two again, but it remained empty. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lost it like that," Evelyn finally whispered. For the first time since the memory began, a smile formed on my other half's face. "No, that's exactly what I needed. Now let's get the hell out of here." "Cayden, Cayden, Cayden!" Evelyn screamed. I was back in the hallway. How long was I out? I thought to myself, noticing that I was still running, almost like my legs were on autopilot. Doing a quick check behind me, I confirmed that the demon was still there, ugly as ever.
A few expletives escaped my lips as I pushed forward, determined to not let it gain any leeway. In front of me, the rest of the group was still running, though I could tell that Leo was slowing down, and by the looks of things was about to stumble. The way his body swayed with every step, his feet dragging behind him as he ran, gave me a sick feeling to my stomach. The last thing we needed was for someone to fall behind and become prey to that monstrosity. I'm back, I confirmed, shouting up to Evelyn. She glanced behind me, at me, for a moment, that look of concern painting her face which could be used for an artist's masterpiece. I shook my head. I needed to focus. Concentrating on the task at hand, I once again got into a rhythm of running, matching my breaths to the strides of my feet. Just as I was starting to get into the zone, however, I heard the sound of feet stumbling and a loud fuck. Out of instinct, I ran past the now fallen Leo, only to do a 180 and groan audibly. I gritted my teeth, and without a second's hesitation, I grabbed his arm and thrust him forward, putting me right into the path of the monster. Come on, get your ass moving, I growled, shoving him forward as I scrambled to avoid the swing of the demon. Unfortunately for me, I was only able to take 2 steps before I felt the rusty blade slide down my back, slicing through my skin like butter. I screamed loudly, clenching my hands into fists. The pain was unbearable. It felt like someone was taking molten lava and pouring it down my back, digging the fiery nails deep within my skin. This was no time to stop moving though, so I bit my lip until I drew blood and kept running. As I half ran, half pushed Leo to keep up with the rest of the group, I blinked rapidly to force the blackness away that was ever so slowly seeping into the corners of my vision. My breathing became labored the more that I ran, each step feeling like I was running underwater. I thought I heard someone shout something in my direction, but at this point, the booming in my head and insurmountable amount of pain blocked out anything in the outer world. Knowing I was running out of time, I tried to shout up to the girl to hurry up, but I'm pretty sure it came out as inaudible mumbles. My steps began to slow with every passing second, though I made up my mind no matter what, I wouldn't stop running until I passed out. From the amount of pain I was in, the thought of running back into the monster may not have been the worst way to go. Making out the shape of Leo turn a corner, I followed suit, knowing that this would be the final stand. With the last remaining bit of my strength, I thrust myself forward into the corner, around the corner, letting go of everything as I fell into the darkness. I had another vision. It wasn't as vivid as the one in the hallway, but I remembered a lot of flashing lights. There was laughter. I couldn't tell if it was Evelyn's or Thea's, but it sounded really happy and carefree. The more I tried to remember, the more the dream seemed to blur, and by the end of it the only thing I could remember was the number 3.
I painfully opened my eyes, blinking away the bright lights in my vision as I let out a groan. The sweet relief of pain my dream offered ended with a rude awakening as my back felt like it was on fire. As soon as I tried to sit up, I felt a hand on my head, pushing me back down. Don't, Thea warned, giving me a stern look. Evelyn and Arian went to go find some stuff to stitch you up while I was put on babysitting duty. You aren't going to move, got it? I tried to nod, putting a shaking elbow on the hardwood floor to prop myself up on my side. The room we seemed to be in was much nicer than the last one. It had what looked like a fireplace in the corner, unlit of course, and a worn-down bookshelf. The rest of the room was hard to make out my awkward position, but I guessed it was some sort of office, or maybe a lounge area. Despite being indoors, no window in sight, I felt a cold draft rush through me, causing me to shiver. Thea glanced at me out of the corner of her eye and worriedly whispered to Leo. I saw him nod anxiously before approaching me. "How are you doing, Cayden?" he asked. I began to sit up again against Thea's command, and the words bringing me out of my dazed state. "I need to find Evelyn," I murmured, brushing off his question. "Oh, no you don't, hotshot. Sit your ass Back down, Thea snapped, glaring at me. I swallowed hard, forcing the black spots in my eyes away as I chewed on the insides of my cheek. Every second that I stayed awake, I could feel the world begin to close the curtains on my vision. Wave after wave of pain hitting me harder than the last. And then it hit me. The monster! Where is it? Shouldn't we be running? I croaked out, renewed with the energy out of fear. Dude, chill. It wasn't as smart as it was scary, and it, sort of ran past us. Thea scratched the back of her head, calming my nerves greatly. I laid back down, my breathing now significantly labored. While I blinked more black spots out of my vision, I could faintly make out what sounded like voices in the other room. Thea glanced backwards before getting up, disappearing out of sight. Harsh whispers could be heard as I assumed Thea was trying to get the two to hurry up. I swallowed hard. The inky black seeping into my peripherals was becoming more and more inviting, only more so knowing that it would help relieve some of the excruciating pain in my back. After a few minutes, footsteps rushed towards me, and 3 figures appeared in my vision, carrying something in their hands. One of them, who I figured to be Evelyn, took my hand and gave it a squeeze. Her mouth seemed to move, but my ears felt clogged with water, not a sound passing through them. When I didn't respond, she squeezed my hand harder, helping me stay awake as her and another person rolled me onto my stomach, an action that made me want to vomit. A new surge of pain shot through my entire body, and I felt tears watering up in my eyes. The agony was unlike anything I had ever felt before, and it took every piece of strength I had left to stay awake. I must have passed out eventually, because when I woke up on my side again, the pain was subdued greatly, but there was still a dull ache across my back. When I tried to sit up this time, my arms gave out entirely, not a single ounce of energy left in my body. The mere action of trying to sit up caused my breathing to become very shallow, sweat trickling down the side of my forehead. Evelyn appeared soon after, running over to my side. There was an aura of tranquility that passed over me as her striking blue eyes met mine. And yet, while they held so much angst and worry, I knew everything would be okay. As if on cue, she began to bite on her fingernail, anxiously looking my wound up and down from what she could see, assessing how bad it was. Don't worry, it's much better now. I tried to smile, hiding my wince as best as I could. Evelyn nodded, handing me a bottle of water. The bottle seemed to be fairly new, and the water inside looked normal. Here, drink this, she said, opening the cap for me. I took a long sip, savoring the sweet taste before swallowing and letting out a relieved breath. Where did you find this? I asked, handing her the half-empty bottle back for her to finish off. We found it lying around and decided it would be best to give it to you, Evelyn said as she pushed the bottle back into my hand. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. I took the bottle back hesitantly, using a moment to study her face. There seemed to be a little cut on her right cheek, complementing her brown hair which fell freely past her shoulders. Dirt and dust covered her neck and face. After a moment of awkward silence, Evelyn blushed and looked away, myself mirroring her actions. I mumbled an apology as I laughed a little, turning my head and catching sight of the girl watching us in the distance. I frowned slightly as we locked eyes, her clear blue eyes staring into my soul, showing no signs of a mental break she seemed to display earlier. The way she held my gaze unnerved me, so I turned back to Evelyn and brushed some dirt off the side of her face. Where's everyone else? I asked. They're around searching for more water and maybe some food, though I don't think they're having much luck. Evelyn pursed her lips, keeping her eyes locked on the doorframe. Just then Leo appeared and scurried his way over to us, keeping his gaze focused on the ground. The three of us stood in awkward silence for a moment, Evelyn and I exchanging a confused look before Leo finally cleared his throat. Cayden? He started, still refusing to look at me. Yeah, what's up, man? I asked casually, looking him up and down. He shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other, cracking his knuckles occasionally. Everything okay? He finally looked up, his green eyes glassy with tears. I'm sorry, he croaked, wiping his face angrily. If my stupid self didn't trip... I got up, with a fair amount of pain and difficulty, but refusing to let it show. I gave Leo a sheepish grin and patted him on the shoulder, waiting for him to look up at me again. Hey, come on, man, don't sweat it. It wasn't your fault, okay? I'm just glad everyone is alive. I reassured him when he finally met my gaze. Leo nodded, forcing his own smile before laughing awkwardly. I'm going to go help Thea and Arian now, he mumbled before scurrying off again. I instinctively reached back into my back pocket, the familiar feeling of my knife calming my nerves greatly. We should probably go too, yeah? I looked at Evelyn. Are you sure you're feeling well enough? She asked, standing up and brushing the dirt off of her jeans. I nodded, making my way over to the doorframe where Leo walked through. There was plenty of broken glass and wood splints scattered on the floor, enough to make me cautious of where I stepped. When we finally made our way to the next room, I saw the rest of the group standing in a circle, waiting for us. There the two lovebirds are, Thea smirked. Did you guys find any food or water? I asked, ignoring her comment. The girl finally stood up and stepped forward, her blue eyes darting from left to right, and I could see her hands were shaking. Is something wrong? Leo asked, obviously nervous from seeing her come forward. Her eyes snapped to Leo, who seemed to wilt under her stare. The room became dead quiet, all of us waiting for her to say something. I stood silently, trying to ignore the dull ache in my back, distracting myself by studying her features. She looked even more paranoid now that all of our attention was onto her, as if having this many eyes on her was the worst thing in the world. When it looked like she was about to step back and not say anything, she spoke, wringing her wrist hastily. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, was all she whispered. A chorus of sighs came from everyone but Leo and I, Leo seeming too terrified of the girl to realize what was going on, and I was too focused on trying to understand what it meant. Thea groaned, rolling her eyes before glaring at the girl. Oh, come on! You made us all wait in anticipation for that? That's like the 5th time you've... Wait, I think she's trying to tell us something, I interrupted, looking her in the eyes, searching for something, anything, in that oasis of blue. Yeah, she's trying to tell us she's crazy, Arian snapped, running his hand through his hair. I shook my head, their words already lost in the background as I focused. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. There had to be something more to it than just a stupid kindergarten phrase. I forced myself to put my mind inside of hers. She obviously didn't like attention. That much was pretty clear from the fact every time someone looked at her, she nearly had a panic attack. But maybe it was more metaphorical, like someone was watching her. The eyes were on her. It could be the voice over the intercom, but we already knew that. I shook my head in frustration. There had to be some sort of explanation I wasn't seeing. Evelyn pulled me out of my trance by grabbing my shoulder gently, pulling me to the side, away from the rest of the group. I looked at her with an irritated face, but my annoyance quickly faded as I saw how concerned she looked. I think we should try and find a way out of here. Without her, Evelyn whispered, pausing for a while before adding the last 2 words. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe Evelyn had just said we should leave someone behind, especially knowing the creature we just escaped from. Evelyn must have saw the shock on my face because she quickly continued, squeezing her thumbs in between her fingers. I mean, come on, Cayden. You have to see it from a practical point of view. She will just hinder. Practical point of view? What's practical about leaving someone behind to fend for themselves against that monster? You saw how broken she is. She obviously has seen things way worse than us. It may be our only way out of this hellhole. How could you even suggest that? I fumed, barely able to keep my voice a whisper. Evelyn seemed hurt by my sudden strike of anger, and for some reason I wanted to take it all back. That anger didn't feel like me. After a moment, Evelyn nodded, keeping her eyes on the girl. You're right, She trailed off, watching the girl who was now on the ground, tucking herself into a ball and rocking back and forth. You have to see where I'm coming from, right? As much as I hated to admit it, Evelyn did have a point. The girl might be a hindrance, a big one at that. I spent a lot of time weighing whether or not it would be worth the attention she may attract for the chance that she had information to help us escape. But at this point, we needed any help we could get, no matter the cost. I do. I understand partly where you're coming from. But she, despite her current mental state, may be our only shot. We wouldn't have gotten where we are now without her. And I won't leave her behind, Evelyn, I said, bringing a hand up to brush her cheek. She lightly pushed my hand away, nodding before walking back to the rest of the group. I stood there for a moment as I watched Evelyn walk over to everyone else, beginning to converse with them occasionally, while occasionally glancing back at me. What worried me wasn't the way that she responded to me trying to console her, but the look she gave me was one of almost distrust. I swallowed hard, wondering if keeping the girl would cost the relationship of the other group members. What sounded like a creak of the floorboard could be heard just outside the door, killing all conversation. Arian put a finger to his lips, signaling everyone to be quiet as he slowly made his way over to the door, carefully putting his ear against it. We all waited in angst for the next sound to come, and I made my way over to the girl, who was now starting to mutter incessantly under her breath, her hand pressed firmly against her ears. As I tried to comfort her, the second sound came, and I nearly had to tackle Leo to the ground to keep him from screaming. Outside the door, an old, broken voice of a man could be heard, clearly trying to imitate a young girl. Let me in, children. Come on, let's play, it giggled. I watched the blood drain from Arian's face as he scrambled away from the door, just in time to avoid the axe that came slicing through the old wood. I said, let's play! The voice roared, the childish tone now replaced with a demonic undertone. Everyone, to the vents, now! I shouted, throwing Leo to his feet and dragging the girl with us. Luckily, the group had piled up desks and chairs to make a makeshift staircase to the vent in case of an emergency, and I saw that Arian and Thea were already through it, Leo and Evelyn quickly following in suit. I gritted my teeth as I dragged the girl along, who seemed to be twice as heavy as she was supposed to be. It wasn't until I looked back when I realized what was going on. What the fuck are you doing? I growled, watching her pull just as hard on my arm, as if she was trying to drag me to the monster who was now halfway done axing its way through the door, looking at me with a deranged smile, its neck tilted nearly completely sideways. No! She shouted, her eyes clenched shut, using every muscle in her body to get me away from the vent. For a moment, I stopped what I was doing, amazed by the fact that she just said what she did. It only took me a second to realize that if we didn't get into that vent, we would be that next thing's chopping block. Yeah, well, too bad. Life first, then we can talk about bad vents later, I muttered, picking up the screaming girl, taking a good couple punches and kicks before shoving her into the vent, closely following behind. I heard the wailing of the creature behind us and the sound of metal against metal. The girl was still refusing to cooperate, and I literally was pushing her through the enclosed space with all my strength. My back would drag against the metal roof occasionally, causing me to bite my lip as I fought back tears. I prayed that the tunnel wasn't long, and I tried to silence the girl, but she refused to listen, screaming the entire time as I shoved her along, making it nearly impossible for me to hear where the rest of the group went. Eventually, I had to call out for help. "Evelyn! Everyone! Where are you guys?" I shouted, trying my hardest to ignore the fear in my voice, hearing the metal noise behind me getting louder. I thought I heard someone's head left, so I squeezed my arm along the side of the vent to push the girl left when we reached the impasse, her body doing everything in her powers not to turn left. Realizing my mistake, I pushed her to the end of the wall first, not wanting her to bend my arm in a way arms shouldn't bend, at the same time forcing another arm along the other side of the wall and pulling her arm left, forcing her body to turn. Then, with a hard shove, pushing her down the curved vent. After a long journey with many kicks to the face, we finally made it to the end of the shaft. An opening to a room could be seen even behind the girl, its dull glow of what seemed to be candlelight calming my nerves greatly. When she saw the glow as well, the girl's struggle intensified, shoving both her feet back into my face. Knowing her strategy, after being kicked in the face the first 3 times she tried this, I dropped to my stomach and grabbed her flailing legs and pushed her forward. This is when the girl tried a new tactic, something that worked for almost a second. The girl began to cry. I heard the sobs distinctly, not unlike that of a mother wolf who just saw her cubs slain. It was a cry of complete and utter despair, one that words couldn't describe because there were no words that could truly paint how much pain they were in. These sounds almost made me forget about the metal scraping behind me, long enough to pause and decide to let her settle down first, as I held her legs in place, not letting her kick me again, but also not forcing her forward. Eventually, she quieted down, her cries turning into whimpers as she lay in the vent. I waited for one of the other group members to say something, or at least ask if we were okay, considering her cries must have been heard from even outside this shitty vent. After a few minutes of hearing the girl's quiet sobs and whimpers, I decided I was done pushing the kicking girl through the vent. I made the final crawl and forced her through the end of the tunnel. I felt bad when I heard her hit the ground with an unceremonious thud, but it turned to anger as I realized the rest of the group didn't even bother to try and help her. I get that she's a little crazy, but that doesn't give them the fucking right to just let her fall, I thought to myself, my eyes filling with rage. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes and quickly counting to 10, mentally hitting myself. There it was again, that uncontrollable rage that Evelyn saw. I thought back to my memory, the one of my own father, and the look in his eyes that he had when he beat his own son. I swore to myself there and then that I wouldn't let my anger control me like that. And despite how much I wanted this wish to come true, I had a gut feeling that no matter how hard I tried, that wouldn't be the last time. I opened my eyes. The glow got brighter the closer I got, and I couldn't really make out what was in front of me, but it looked like the group had formed a half circle around something. I exited the vent in a similar fashion to the girl, no one offering me a hand as I hit the ground hard. The girl lay curled up in a ball next to me, rocking back and forth, crying softly in defeat. I gently rubbed her back, making a reminder to come back and comfort her. The rest of the group didn't even acknowledge me as I approached from behind them, and it wasn't only until I put a hand on Evelyn's shoulder did she turn and meet my gaze with the saddest look I've seen on her face yet. "What's wrong?" I asked, a terrible feeling beginning to rise in my stomach. Evelyn didn't answer, only turning her head to look up at the scene before us. Written in blood on the wall was the phrase, for all that have sinned and rise high in the glory of our Savior. And there, looming over us, stood a 9-foot-tall, upside-down wooden cross. Though the cross itself wasn't what horrified me. It was the girl who couldn't have been more than 19, nailed to the symbol of the devil, her stomach sliced open, and her entrails spilling down onto the floor like ribbons. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to this chapter of Into the Darkness. If you made it this far, please like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment down below your favorite parts or parts that you would like to see some work on. It really shows a lot to me that you're paying attention, you care. And yeah, anyways, if you want part 4, chapter 4, let's try and get this to 5 likes, and I will consider doing that and continuing the story of Evelyn and Cayden. With that being said, thank you again for listening to the story, and TKG out. Peace.